Imagine opening, say, a history book, and you find names of people who just, well, never existed. Now think about those non-existent people potentially voting in your election.
Mm,
It's not science fiction, unfortunately. Across the globe, really, millions of phantom registrations are polluting official voter lists. We call them ghost voters. And their presence. It's causing a real foundational crisis in democracies everywhere.
yeah, it really is.
So for this deep dive, we've looked at material from recent voter roll audits across 5 very different countries: Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe. The goal is to figure out what this whole global mystery tells us about election integrity, as we head into 2025.
A crucial question.
Definitely. So let's dive in.
Mm.
What exactly is a ghost voter? We hear the term, but what does it mean? Essentially, they're fake entries or duplicates, or sometimes just outdated names clogging up the official lists.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a bureaucratic slip-up, someone
Yeah.
dies or moves, and their name just stays there.
But that's where the danger lies, isn't it? Because here's the implication for you, the actual voter. Those errors, whether they're simple mistakes or, deliberate manipulation, they create this massive opening for fraud.
Okay.
If, say, 1 million names are still on that list long after people have passed away, well, that's potentially 1 million votes that could be cast illegally, and that immediately eats away at the legitimacy of the whole election result.
Right. It casts doubt on everything.
Exactly. A clean, accurate voter list isn't just like a nice-to-have feature of democracy. It's the absolute bedrock. When that list gets corrupted, we're not just talking about a technical glitch anymore. We're talking about a serious breakdown in civic faith. People start thinking, does my vote even count?
And you can see that erosion happening really all over the world.
Mm.
Let's start our audit in Asia, in the Philippines. They've been wrestling with this exact problem for years now. Before 2022, their election commission, COMELEC, they found these systemic issues. Things like identical fingerprints registered multiple times. And of course, names of people known to be deceased still showing up on the active voter rolls.
Yeah.
It was pretty clear the system was vulnerable, potentially to deliberate duplication.
A classic scenario, unfortunately.
So the big intervention came with a widespread rollout of biometric verification, fingerprints, facial data, the whole package. And the result of that huge effort, get this, they managed to purge over 7 million duplicate names from the rolls.
7 million, wow.
7 million. It's staggering.
It really is. And, that's a powerful testament to how technology can help clean up years of, administrative mess and maybe outright corruption. But that cleanup itself kind of raises new questions, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if the problem was that deep 7 million entries, you have to ask, who was behind creating those duplicates in the first place? And maybe more importantly, how many elections before this cleanup were influenced or even decided because of this specific vulnerability?
Yeah, that's unsettling. Cleaning the list is one thing, but the impact of past problems.
Exactly. It lingers. You can't just erase that history.
Okay, so the Philippines showed biometrics can be a powerful tool, maybe the answer in some ways. But what happens when a country facing similar issues decides to go all in on that digital approach? Let's shift now to Africa, specifically Kenya. Kenya's seen repeated, sometimes violent controversies over election results tied to these kinds of issues.
Very much so. A volatile situation.
Yeah. So before their 2017 elections, the Election Commission there actually admitted publicly that over 1 million ghost voters, dead people, multiple registrations are on the list. That admission alone triggered huge protests, legal challenges. Is chaos.
And when you have that kind of systemic failure leading to real civic instability, what often happens? A massive, usually expensive tech overhaul. So Kenya started using these advanced biometric voter registration kits, scanning fingerprints, detailed facial data. They were really aiming for digital certainty.
Trying to lock it down technologically.
Yeah, right. But here's where it gets interesting. This introduces a subtle shift in the focus of the debate. Activists almost immediately went from worrying about, or dead people voting, to worrying about who controls the data.
Ah, okay.
If one particular group or political entity manages the security, the implementation, the whole back end of this highly centralized digital technology, does the concern just shift from the ghost voters on a paper list to the potential manipulation of digital results? Digital trust suddenly becomes the new battleground.
That's a really critical point. And it's a perfect pivot, actually, because while Kenya went high-tech, our next stop, Argentina, found a surprisingly Well, low-tech solution, or at least a citizen-driven one.
Tell us about that.
So Argentina has a centralized system. Their national registry handles the voter rolls,
Yeah.
and they cross-check with birth and death records. Sounds okay, right? But the problem was persistent delays, especially in removing deceased voters, particularly out in rural areas where communication is slower.
A common bureaucratic lag.
Exactly. But here's the fascinating part, the real nugget. Citizens just got tired of waiting. Thousands of ordinary volunteers started what they actually called vigilante auditing.
Vigilante auditing. I like the sound of that.
Right, they took the publicly available voter lists,
Yeah.
compared them side by side with public death records online, and just started flagging the discrepancies themselves,
Right.
sending lists to the authorities.
Wow. That's crowdsourced democracy in action. It's incredibly powerful. It really shows that transparency doesn't always need to come from the top down. When the official system isn't accountable or just slow, citizens can apply pressure. They can hold the government's feet to the fire using basically open data and persistence.
Absolutely, a very different approach. Now, speaking of severe problems, let's look at Nigeria. Huge population, historically reliant on manual record keeping. The system there was, frankly, ripe for manipulation for a long time.
Yes, Nigeria's faced significant challenges with election integrity.
And the scale of the irregularity was almost absurd by 2019, according to independent observers. They found specific polling units where the number of registered voters was actually higher than the number of people who physically lived in the area.
More voters than residents.
Yeah. And get this. Some areas even reported voter turnout figures over 200%.
200% turnout. That's not just a red flag, that's a siren. Textbook ghost voter exploitation.
Absolutely. You just can't have a credible election with numbers like that. So Nigeria's response for the 2023 elections was quite similar to Kenya's, actually. They introduced the Biometric Voter Accreditation System, or BVAS.
Right, the BVAS system.
And importantly, reports suggest that ghost voting activity dropped significantly because now voters needed verifiable biological data fingerprint or facial recognition right there at the polling unit to be accredited to vote.
Which makes sense. It tightens things up considerably at the point of voting. However, and this is crucial, this brings up what analysts often call the difficult trade-off or the hard balance.
Okay, what's the trade-off?
Well, while fraud seems to have plummeted, which is good, the overall voter turnout also fell quite dramatically.
Why is that?
The theory is that many legitimate, honest voters, maybe especially in remote areas or those with older or poor quality ID documents, or maybe just technology glitches, they struggled to verify their data using these new biometric kits. So the challenge becomes, how do you protect the system from fraud without accidentally disenfranchising thousands, maybe millions, of real citizens who have every right to vote?
That's a tough needle to thread. Blocking fraud, but not legitimate voters.
A very hard balance indeed.
Okay, so we've seen massive fraud issues, tech solutions, citizen auditing. Let's finish up in Europe, a different kind of case.
Yeah.
Germany. We generally assume systems there are advanced, maybe even impervious, but even Germany has its own unique vulnerability.
Right, it's not immune. And it's
Yeah.
a different flavor of the problem, as you say.
Their issue isn't really large-scale intentional fraud. It seems to be more about, well, administrative slackness, maybe. When a German citizen moves from, say, Munich to Berlin, they're legally required to deregister their old address in Munich.
Okay.
But many people just forget.
Right.
Or don't bother. So this creates thousands of instances where one person is legally registered to vote in two different cities at the same time.
Accidental duplicates, essentially.
Exactly. And in 2021, audits found over 80,000 such duplicate registrations, all stemming from this administrative oversight. It's a different cause, but the end result is similar. The list gets polluted with ineligible entries.
And what's really interesting there is Germany's proposed solution. It might actually be a kind of gold standard, potentially, for other developed nations. They're moving towards real-time digital synchronization between all the municipal registration databases across the country.
How would that work?
Basically, the second you register your new home in Berlin, the system automatically talks to the system in Munich and cancels your old registration there. Instantly. It fixes that specific bureaucratic failure right away. It shows that even in advanced countries, sometimes the fight is against simple inertia or system gaps, not necessarily deliberate malice.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've looked at 5 really diverse situations: Philippines, Kenya, Argentina, Nigeria, Germany. If we synthesize all this, what are the key takeaways? What should you, listening right now, really understand about this whole ghost voter phenomenon?
I think we can boil it down to maybe three core realities. First, and this is crucial, you have to accept that voter list errors are universal. This isn't just a developing world problem. Rich countries, poor countries, advanced systems, basic systems, they all face this vulnerability. The issue often isn't just the dead people on the list, it's the bureaucratic reluctance to find the errors and fix them quickly.
Okay, universality is key. And second, we saw in places like Kenya and Nigeria that technology definitely helps, right? I mean,
Yeah.
7 million duplicates removed in the Philippines is massive proof.
Absolutely. Technology can be a powerful tool, but, and this is the big but, it's not a silver bullet. It's not magic.
Right.
The tech is only ever as good, as transparent, and as honest as the people who program it, manage the data, and operate it on election day. We saw how quickly the worry shifted in Kenya from basic fraud to who actually controls the digital verification process itself. Technology can just move the goalposts for potential manipulation.
Okay, so tech helps, but isn't a panacea. And finally, the third point sounds like it ties back to where we started: trust.
Precisely. How fragile public confidence really is. That's maybe the most important lesson here. Once large parts of the population, like we saw signs of in Argentina, and definitely in Kenya, become convinced that an election is fundamentally rigged because of phantom voters or flawed lists, fixing that perception becomes exponentially harder than just fixing the database itself.
The damage to trust is harder to repair than the technical glitch.
Exactly. So this ongoing struggle for clean, accurate elections, it's fundamentally about maintaining civic faith. That's the real test. That's what I'd call the global democracy test we're facing right now. Do our governments all around the world have the political will to audit themselves honestly, find the flaws, and tell the public about it? Or do they try to cover up mistakes to, save face?
And that audit, that honesty, it matters directly to you, the listener, because your name on that voter list is, in a way, proof of your existence within the democratic system. But when ghost voters proliferate, when the list is polluted with fakes or errors real, living citizens effectively lose some of their voice. Your power gets diluted.
Well said.
That's why this constant vigilance is so crucial, whether it's government-led digital reforms like in Germany, or maybe citizen-led crowdsourcing like we saw in Argentina. The pressure for accuracy and transparency has to stay on.
And that brings us right to the final, maybe provocative thought for you to chew on. Building directly on that successful grassroots movement in Argentina. Should every country just publish its full voter list publicly? Names, maybe even addresses? Allow citizens themselves, like those vigilante auditors, to scrutinize the data and flag potential errors. The privacy and security risks are obvious, of course. That's a huge debate. But maybe the potential payoff in terms of accountability, transparency, and ultimately building genuine public trust might be even greater. Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Is radical transparency the answer? Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.